Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the ICA. I love hearing all the chatter already, like everyone's so excited to be together. I'm Monica Garza. I'm the Charlotte Wagner Director of Education here at the ICA. Tonight's Artist Voice program is a very special one for us, and it's designed in conjunction with the Gun Violence Memorial Project, which you can see upstairs in the ICA's fourth floor galleries, which are open till 9 p.m. this evening. Now, many people, organizations, and agencies were involved in this presentation, but none more important than the families and individuals who have generously participated in the activation of this memorial by sharing objects of loved ones. Through their generosity, this nationwide epidemic gains a face, or many faces, as the thousands of viewers in Boston bear witness to just a few of the countless individual losses our community has suffered. It's both a small and an enormous act to share what these loved ones meant to them, their family, and their community, and we are honored to help share these stories. I thank them for their selfless acts. We are also incredibly grateful to the individuals who will soon be joining our stage and are instrumental to this project. Artist Hank Willis Thomas, Jadi Amazi, Principal of Mass Design Group, Chaplain Clementina Chéry, co-founder, president, and CEO of the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, and my colleague, Ruth Erickson, the Barbara Lee Chief Curator here at the ICA. I thank them all and the organizations they represent for their many contributions to bring this project to Boston and to convene our many local communities to reflect, to remember, and to respond to what U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy has recently referred to as a national public health crisis. This Boston presentation had its origin several years ago, and we thank Mass Design's co-founder, Michael Murphy, who is actually here with us today, I believe, for catalyzing early conversations with the ICA. Today, there are houses not just at the ICA, but at City Hall and Mass Design. It is truly a city-wide installation. We also want to express our gratitude to the many individuals at City Hall and Mass Design Group for supporting and caring for one of the structures of the Gun Violence Memorial Project at their site. I know many of you are actually in attendance here tonight, so thank you. Now, in the spirit of being together as a community, we are actually hosting a reception after the talk right here on our stage. So when the speaking portion of this program concludes, I ask that you remain in your seats just for about 30 seconds, while the screen will then be raised, and then we can enjoy some food and beverages here too. Our guest speakers will each introduce their work in more depth next. So with that said, please help me welcome Hank Willis Thomas, Jadi Amazi, Clementina Chéry, and Ruth Erickson, who will moderate the discussion this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica, and it's so nice to see so many of you here. Thank you so much for spending your evening with us. I wanted to begin by inviting each of you to really introduce yourselves and your work and the way that both of them have been shaped by gun violence and by art and activism. And I thought we would start with you, Hank. So everybody's contributed a few slides here to help this introduction to your work.
Thank you. Do I get to hold
Do you
that?
want to?
Sure. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
It's so nice to be here with you all.
It's a talk back.
It's just so important to always remember that we do get a chance to salute and acknowledge each other. My cousin, Songha Thomas Willis, who was murdered on February 2nd, 2000, I think his primary interest was to make connections with people and then have them be sincere and authentic. And his favorite person in the world was our grandmother, Ruth. So it's a pleasure to sit here with you, Ruth, because I can't say your name without thinking about our favorite person who passed away at 100 years old just 2 years ago. But Ruth's life was a masterclass in living with grace and piety, and through that Songha carried this message which says love overrules, which he shared on a recording that he was making with a friend just a few weeks before he was shot and killed. And so I have kind of been carrying Ruth and Songha's message throughout my life and throughout my work because of the incredible loss that we felt, but also the opportunity gained, frankly, from recognizing that my life could have some greater purpose or meaning in sharing the love and wisdom that they created and shared with me, with all of our family members. But I was thrown off by seeing Adrian Delaney there on the top right. Raise your hand. Adrian I met in 1993. We were in high school. He was an actor. Then we went to NYU together. And so I became a photographer. He would twist my locks. I do not have those anymore. And then we moved to San Francisco the same time, right after my cousin was murdered. And Adrian was one of the only kind of friends I had there, and was my muse in a lot of my photographs. I haven't seen him in, like, we realized, maybe almost 20 years. We've seen each other, like, in passing. So it's just, I feel really blessed to be in communion, because I think I take for granted, we all take for granted all the things that happen in our lives, that the people who touch us and make us, and how these monumental relationships can come and go, and only in dramatic circumstances, maybe when someone is kidnapped or killed in a dramatic way, or dies as a result of a horrific disease, do we really take the time to reflect on the power and the beauty of all of the relationships that we've nourished, the relationships that make our lives. And I've had the privilege of working with Michael Murphy and Jadi and so many wonderful people at Mass Design on making work that commemorates the power and the beauty of life, and memorializing the lives that have been taken away from us in unjust ways. So thank you, Jill, for acknowledging that, and Ruth, and to everyone. I just feel so much gratitude. And to my collaborator, Sam Jaratani, who collaborates with me on all the public art projects, and my friend Scout, so there's people who I've worked with a lot who are here that I can't help but to acknowledge. And this work is, I like to consider, I don't believe in nation states, but I like to consider myself a patriot. I can, and hold the multitude and the hypocrisy of it, because whether or not I like or even believe in America, these imaginary lines define my life, and navigating the maze of it is something that I've attempted to negotiate through work that acknowledges these 14,916 confirmed deaths, homicides by gun violence in the United States in 2018, and I've made these series of falling star flag pieces commemorating for almost 10 years. But the piece that kind of started it off in many ways was this photograph that I took around the time, like at my cousin's funeral, and revisited a few years later, thinking about kind of watching my mother and my aunt go through the process of taking this 27-year-old's life and attempting to celebrate it, and watching, they had to buy a new suit and new socks, and and he was shot over a gold chain that he wasn't wearing, but his friends were wearing. His friends he hadn't seen in 20 years that he ran into, that somebody saw them with it. They took the jewelry off of his friends, and they shot and killed him, made him lay face down in the snow, and took nothing from him, but they took him from us. And at the end of the day, it seemed that commerce was still playing a role. And watching them in the funeral home, being like, okay, there's a $7,000 casket that seems to show that you love them a lot, and then the $5,000 casket, and the $2,000 casket, and I couldn't imagine I was in painful watching my aunt with her only son try to quantify his life into a box that's going to be thrown in the dirt, never to be seen again. And there, at the time, there was a MasterCard campaign about priceless that I wanted to kind of highlight. the pricelessness of his life and these priceless moments where you're attempting to legitimate or qualify a loss through the way you perform it to others. So there's a lot there. And we also made a series, my friend Kambu and I made a series of images and a stop motion animation called Winter in America, where we used the G.I. Joe action figures I played with as a kid to recreate the last 5 minutes of my cousin's life as told to us by the people he was with that night.
Thank you so much, Hank.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Always so wonderful to be in company with you and hear some of these stories. Similarly, very grateful to be here with you all tonight. I am Jadi Amazi, and I am a principal at MASS Design Group based here in our Boston studio. And MASS is an acronym that stands for Model of Architecture Serving Society, and we are a nonprofit design collective, and our work is at the intersection of social justice and design. We're a team of over about 130 folks representing a multitude of disciplines represented across 5 studios. So we have a studio in Santa Fe, New Mexico, Poughkeepsie, New York, Kigali, Rwanda, Boston, as I mentioned, and then our landscape studio, which is global and not necessarily in one place. In the latter half of our now almost 15-year existence, we've had an opportunity to focus resources in research in design labs, which is allowing us to focus on topic areas that feel urgent to the work that we're doing and urgent to the work that our project partners are doing. And so we have design labs focused on fringe cities, restorative justice, abundant futures, deaf space and disability, as well as sustainable native communities, and then of course, public memory. And as the director of the Public Memory and Memorials Lab, I have the opportunity to work with partners like Hank, like Clementina, like Ruth, and so many other folks, as we understand that public memory is how we write our history into public space. And there's a number of projects that we're working on across this realm, but the thing that we are all aware of and the thing that we're understanding is that this public memory, this writing in our public space has for so long been limited, right? There's this question of whose stories are being told in the public realm, but more importantly, whose stories are being left out. And so in our collaborations with project partners, we're looking at ways to expand these narratives in the public realm, to expand the stories, undo the erasure to the best that we can. And if you go to the next slide, we're asking these questions around who or what is deemed important, whose voices are we hearing, whose, as I mentioned, are being left out. And this selective representation is really deepening community traumas, and it obstructs our ability for meaningful repair and healing. And so part of the work that we are doing in collaboration with so many of these beautiful partners is to get ourselves closer to healing by way of spatializing memory. And so the kind of running thesis of the lab is always rooted in this question, which is how can spatializing memory support healing and inspire collective action for generations to come? And that's the central question that we're asking through each of these projects, but then of course there are specific questions that we're asking in each of these relationships. And while we, as a design team, as a design firm, had already begun thinking about memorialization through a number of projects, such as the UK Holocaust Memorial, as well as potentially expanding the Kigali Genocide Memorial, our work, our physical work in memorialization here in the United States really began, obviously, with the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. And it's in this project where we were able to expand on some of those lessons learned from previous projects, but also really be able to launch this public memory and memorials lab and start to ask ourselves, what lessons have we learned here? What are we understanding about memorialization that could impact a larger community and result in more projects? And it was while we were at the opening for the National Memorial for Peace and Justice that we met Pam Bosley and Annette Nance-Holt. Hank and Michael were there and met these two amazing women who asked, what would it look like to create a national memorial to victims of gun violence, both of them having had their sons taken due to this epidemic on separate occasions. And we were inspired by that question. We were charged and challenged by that question. And in collaboration with Hank, we responded with the project that we're here to celebrate and talk about today. So with that, I will pass it to Clementina and offer more in the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It is an honor to be here. It seems very intimidating. I know I feel like a fish out of water, yet I'm going to learn how to swim tonight. So thank you so much. I just want to acknowledge any of the survivors here. And if you're here, can you just please stand and acknowledge that you're here so people can get to see you. Thank you. Thank you. Please stand. Thank you for being here. So my story really started, I tell people if I knew what I was doing, I'd be a dangerous woman. And I was a stay-at-home mom. My husband went to work, and my friends would call me an inner-city wannabe suburban mom who lives in the inner city and stays home. That was me. And so I knew what was going on in the world. I knew what was going on in my community because I heard it on the news constantly. But when the narrative came that there were a drug deal gone bad, they were known to the police, they just came out of either of juvenile department of DYS, county, state, or federal prison, I would breathe because to me, well, that would never happen to me. And then when it did happen to me, and that's the narrative that I've heard that came on the 11 o'clock news, he just came out of DYS, or it was a drug deal gone bad. I became one of those people. And yet, I remember going to the hospital not knowing what to do, and I left empty-handed, physically and within my soul. What I didn't want to do, I didn't want to focus on who killed Lewis Brown, because I didn't want the wrong black child to be arrested simply because he was black. I really wanted people to know who Lewis Brown was. He wanted to be the first black president. He had goals, he had dreams, he had visions. But he was also concerned because when good things happen, every politician, every adult, every minister takes the credit. When bad things happen, they're blaming young black boys or they're blaming single mothers. And for him, he was concerned that if things didn't change, by the time he got into the White House, his friends would either be dead, addicted to drugs, or in jail. And he would have to run his administration with the same old blood, us. We say one thing, and we do one thing. Next. And so I needed to do something. After society realized that Lewis wasn't a gangbanger, it wasn't a drug deal gone bad, we wanted for nothing. All resources came to us. And so we really started the Peace Institute, and our mission is really simple. To serve as a center of healing, teaching, and learning for families and communities impacted by murder, trauma, grief, and loss. We serve families on both sides of the guns, the families whose loved ones have been killed and the families whose loved ones are in prison for killing someone else. I live what I walk. I live what I talk. I needed to know who could raise a child that could kill. Doris, a mother just like me, who tried her best to raise her son, Charles. We met at our local bar, woman to woman, mother to mother, heart to heart. I extended my hands, and she accepted. We became friends. I had to put myself in her shoe. What would I want others to know if my child had killed her child? Now, Lewis wasn't the intended target, but it didn't matter. He was there to kill somebody else's child. So we became friends. Doris died 2 years ago of cancer. We believe that all families impacted by murder deserve to be treated with dignity and compassion, including those that are killed due to police-involved shooting. And we have a great vision. It may not happen in my lifetime, to create and sustain an environment where families can live in peace and where all people are valued. Next. So we have a model. We do it in 3 phases. You know, our families, our communities, and our society. Really looking at our programs, responding to families in that first 24 to 78 hours after a homicide. Our healing support services, which was our connectors, you know, with the memorial, community reentry, peace play in urban settings, within our community and our society. We work at multiple levels to promote peace and healing. Next. You know, there's a quote that says that we are turning into a nation of traumatized survivors. And so those numbers are there. I really just wanted to put those numbers. We know the data. The data is there. We also want to celebrate and acknowledge, especially you're going to hear in the news, you know, homicide, gun violence. We're 5 less than we were last year. For us, yes, we continue to celebrate. Yet, the data tells us that for each victim, there are at least 10 immediate family members who are impacted by that one homicide. And those numbers do not include the person who pulled the trigger and their families. So what you see here is our traveling memorial. When Lewis was killed, I really just started, didn't know that this was going to do anything or be anything. But what I wanted to do, I really wanted for people whose loved ones were killed to know that somebody else cared about their loved one. So I used to cut out the pictures out of the newspaper and with glue and tape and write, and I would make memorial buttons. And then I would send it to the reporter who wrote the article, and I would say, please deliver this to the family of. Never left any information. So the traveling memorial is really a way of, I wanted people to see the names, to see the faces, to realize that the pain is real and they matter to someone. And so this memorial would travel, schools would want it. On this memorial, you don't know who's a gangbanger, who's an honor student, who's a police officer. You don't know who's who, what it is. It's basically lives. Next. And so for us, healing is central. We have a modality that is peace play in urban settings. This modality, it consists of sand, of miniatures, and of a round tray. I was introduced to this modality maybe about 15 years ago by someone who I considered a spiritual advisor, Reverend Michelle Walsh. This modality is sand tray in urban settings, and it was used with the victims of 9/11. There were not enough social workers to be there for those families of 9/11, and this really became relevant to support those children. When I tried it on, because we're not clinicians, we're not social workers, we have broken every single rule that this healing modality has, and so I called it peace play in urban settings, where again, this is one of those tools that really helped me. I tell people it kept me from taking my own life and the life of my children, because traditional talk therapy did not work for me because the clinicians did not look like me. So this is something that is culturally and spiritually relevant to me and to the community I serve. And so just being here, making this connection with this memorial, this happens internally at the Peace Institute, yet to see a gun violence memorial, a national gun violence memorial, because most of us think that gun violence is a Black urban issue. It is not. It is not. It is a human rights issue. And so what this memorial is doing is really breaking down that barrier and reminding us how valuable and precious life is. Thank you so much for this opportunity for being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those introductions to your incredible work. And I think what's so special about this project for me, having done a lot of projects at my 10 years at this museum, is the way that this project has brought together an architect, an incredible activist, and a mother, and a nonprofit leader, and an artist, and the kind of synergy that is only made possible through your work. And I just want to say that we are working with the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute to organize with Mass Design collecting events, local collecting events. The next ones will be held November 15th and 16th, in which families can contribute objects that will then be integrated into the memorial. And I also, just because I don't think Monica said it in her introduction, I want to make sure that this audience knows that Mass Design and Hank work together to create the Embrace on the Boston Common. And so what is so special about having this memorial here in Boston is that you two have already changed our city and have changed the landscape of memorials in our country. And I think that this is part of that work. But I wanted to actually ask each of you, for me, it is an incredibly exciting and creative time in thinking about how memory lives in public space, thinking about the space of memorials, both, what stories are not being told, kind of counter memorials, and it feels like in some ways the most kind of generative and creative space for a lot of people. But I wanted to ask each of you, outside of the gun violence memorial, in your life, do you have an encounter with a memorial or a monument that really shaped you, that you remember from some point in your life early on that was formative? Jody, you talk about memorials a lot.
I do.
I'll call you out.
There's two, and I'll try to keep it brief, two different types of memorials and two ways for me to answer this question. I would say the first is the number of memorials that I would see in and around the city of Boston. I grew up in Roxbury, Mattapan, Dorchester, and so you always would see these community-made memorials on street corners, light poles, and there were teddy bears and candles and shoes and et cetera. And I always asked, myself and my mom, how are we going to preserve these? How are we going to protect these? Why do they eventually go away? Why are these not permanent? If somebody felt like it was important to mark this place, this moment, why don't they stay? Why is it that the next time we drive over here that they're gone? And so that question around permanence, I guess, has been with me for quite some time. And then I would also say another kind of profound moment in memorialization that I had, I don't remember what grade I was in, but we took a school field trip to New York City to see the Statue of Liberty. And I knew I was going. My mom knew, she signed the slip, whatever. She's like, have fun, pay attention, come learn some things, come back and tell me what you learned. And so I go and I have a great time. We climb up to the top. It's wonderful. And I come home and I was like, Ma, we saw the Statue of Liberty and I had pizza and blah, 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 blah. And she's like, so tell me about the Statue of Liberty. And I was like, well, it was a great marker for Ellis Island. It welcomed those that were migrating to the US. It was this symbol of freedom and arrival and et cetera. And she's like, and what else? I was like, that's it, Ma. That's what they told me, and I had pizza, and she's like, what else are you missing? And I was like, I have no idea what this lady's talking about. So then I had to go to my encyclopedias, because I had a set, because that's the type of mother that I had, to try to look this up, figure it out, and I found the same information. And so the next day I asked my teacher, I said, do you know anything else about the Statue of Liberty? My mom keeps asking me something else. What my mother wanted me to know, which she later told me, was that actually the Statue of Liberty was given to the US to celebrate emancipation. And I was like, wait a minute. Why did they not tell me this on the field trip? Why was this not in the encyclopedia? Why did my teacher not have this information? And this is something that I was just recently reminded of, this story at another convening where somebody opened their talk with this moment, this tidbit about the Statue of Liberty, in the ways in which America has altered this history around one of the most iconic monuments, statues in our country to fit the narrative that it wants to tell about itself. And so that question that my mother asked me, and what else, is also something that has stuck with me in my work.
What about you two?
Whew. I think for me, I came to this country when I was 10 years old. I'm from Honduras, Central America. And I think for me, seeing really are the street memorials, as Jody was saying, and seeing teddy bears, still not understanding, but feeling so sad of the teddy bears just hanging there, especially when it rained, and soggy. And for me, that was kind of re-triggering and re-traumatizing. Why would someone do that? And then even more painful when the city would just take the memorials down without explaining with the families. And so for us, one of the things we did is working with the Mass Office for Victims Assistance to bring the Garden of Peace that is at the Salt and Star building as a way of remembering and memorializing. And even through and doing this work is now, looking, and Ruth, I don't know if she's here, she's an artist in resident with the Peace Institute.
Another Ruth,
not this Ruth, another Ruth, working with our young people, creating Generation Peace and creating peace pole trails along the routes, and working with survivors to also help them to create a different type of memorial that's public and that's visible, in making our city, instead of looking at hot spots, creating kind of peace zones. So again, living memorial, yet memorial that will inspire you with love and unity and hope and joy, courage, and also forgiveness.
Thank you. I guess when I think about monuments, I think about memorials, and they are different. I guess I heard the question first about monuments, but I would say a memorial that really stuck out for me from an early age was the Vietnam War Memorial, because I was born the year after we lost that war, not knowing that we lost that war till I was in my 20s or 30s. But there was a lot of, obviously, in 1980, in the early 80s especially, the opening of the monument was very controversial, and there was a lot of tension around it. And also, but it was just a bunch of names and words, and I didn't quite understand it. But I did go to high school in Washington, D.C., and the Lincoln Memorial and the Jefferson Memorial, and there were all of these memorials and monuments everywhere. But and that shaped a lot of the way that I think about public space, because that's why we go to DC, really, to commemorate and to acknowledge and to learn. But what really, the first thing that came to my mind when you said that, for some reason, was the Black church, especially the churches in North Philadelphia, because when it's where my mother was born, and my grandmother lived for most of her life, or all of her life, a long, long time. But those were, on every other corner, there was a church. And they were monumental buildings. And the community was, obviously, if you think about the Christian tradition, it is about memorial, right, of the dead and risen God. I wouldn't say that I thought about it that way, in this way. I'm not particularly religious in a specific way, but I think going to church as much as I have, I've felt the Spirit and recognize the power and the importance of spaces where we can commemorate not just one spirit, but all of the spirits, the one spirit that is all of us. And I think thinking about Rothko's chapel, artists making spaces where we can reflect. What I love about the National Memorial for Peace and Justice was it was a place for us to kind of have come for healing and gather and acknowledge and learn. And the Embrace, I believe, is another opportunity for people to do that. And this is yet another one. And so I think I am really interested in I guess, the holy and sacred places that we can create when we call people together to acknowledge the truth. And in this case, the truth is that all of these lives matter. And they're also all of our lives. And I can't help but to look at all of you and think about I don't know how many chairs are in this room, but more people were probably shot and killed this week than there are chairs in this room.
Definitely.
And they could be any of us. So I hope you can also acknowledge and think about your life as a representation of the life of someone who's no longer here as recently as minutes ago.
One of the things that each of your answers really brought home to me is that it's not only what has been built or erected, whether or not it's, a formal act or an informal act, but also how much the storytelling around that memorial or that monument both changes and informs what we know about the Vietnam veterans or about the Statue of Liberty, and just that sense of the importance of of narrative and of storytelling and contextualization and how that evolves over time. And one of the things that I think is quite unique about this memorial is that, as Monica said, it's a traveling project, right? It opened in Chicago in 2019, it traveled to DC, and then now it's here in Boston in 3 sites. And I know that each of you have gotten to see it in some of those other places and traveled along with this, and it's quite unique to have a mobile memorial in this way. And I just wonder if you could share, in sort of zoning in on this project, something that you had an encounter with, that you witnessed somebody having an encounter with this project that really sticks in your mind in the kind of lifespan of this project since 2019.
Whew. There's so many. I think for me, even before it was built, the collection, appreciating Mass Design reaching out to us to really be that community-based organization where communities trust to make the collection. And we did, and it was bittersweet because we had to let families know gun violence. So that was a hard space to be in, and yet they understood. They understood that. And as they brought the memorials in, as they brought their images in, their collections in, for me, it was like I was reliving each of their experience. And although we served them, yet at the same time, it was a different service. It was a different space because they were able to sit, to tell the story, to feel all the emotions in parting with the collections. Yet, what came out of it is that they matter more because it's no longer just us remembering. Now the world will get to see who they are and learn about them and share the memory, and also not alone. Never wanted to see the memorial, didn't go to Chicago, didn't go to DC. And it was here I decided, it's in my own backyard. Let me at least go help, go volunteer to put it together at City Hall. I think I stayed there for an hour before I could actually go and support. And I think the only reason I went to volunteer because I didn't want Mass Design to say, well, why the heck did she come here to just sit here?
I would have never said that.
And so, yeah, I know they wouldn't have said that. Yet though, it really felt, there was an energy that came through me as I got the box that they were in, brought it over, put it on the floor, and opened it up and picked the first collection up. And then put it was a sense of, and I was okay. I could breathe. I was okay. So it's a bittersweet space, yet It is so profound. And for me, it's healing. For me, it's healing. It's healing.
There's been so many. Why do I have to choose one? Okay, I'm going to do two, quickly. So just building on the object collection, one of the moments or all of the moments that have been very inspiring for me are the cathartic experiences that the families describe having, meaning there's been a number of object collections where I've sat across the table from a family and they share that the process of choosing the object that they were going to donate is the first time that they've stepped into their loved one's bedroom. Or the process of choosing the object that they're going to donate is the first time that they as a family have talked about what happened, because they have to explain it to a younger child or someone who perhaps doesn't know the story but needs to understand why they're getting an object and bringing it in. So being able to reflect with the family on how cathartic this process of choosing an object has been for them has been one of the things that continues to stay with me and something that I often think about. And then the second instance is, as we were closing in DC, we had an opportunity to read the names of all of the individuals that had been included in the memorial to date. And that was a 2.5-hour process, and it was worth every single second. And I can hear it still. And it was in, National Building Museum, this really grand, tall hall. And the families were so appreciative, those that were able to travel to hear their loved ones' names said and sang in that way.
How many names, how many contributors are there at this point?
At this point, where's Maggie when I need her? I believe we have about 983. I'm guessing out here. It's upwards of 1,000.
Amazing.
Maggie?
Folks. She's like,
Do you corroborate?
1,000. She's like, call it 1,000. Yeah.
What about you, Hank?
Well, I figured that I should probably give you the opportunity to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, it's been incredible to have this on view here, and I've gotten to see a lot of people interact with it. And I think that when I bring a group in, and it happened tonight with a group that I was bringing in, I think what this project is really incredible at mediating between are a set of scales. And I think that was very much part of the kind of origin of the project. And so to be able to describe to somebody the scale of the house being 700 bricks, and that being associated with a statistic in 2019 of how many people die per week by guns. And so you have this sense of the large scale that I think in so many epidemics become often for me very kind of paralyzing, or like, how do you move forward from that? How do you comprehend that? But then to be able to kind of zero in on the very personal, that object that is given, that story, that life. When we had a collection event here in June, Teresa brought a teddy bear, or so many families have come back to visit their loved ones and take pictures of other bricks of people. So that sense of the kind of individual with this grand scale, and to watch people absorb that and mediate that and experience that is profound every day in the gallery space. And I think that's been really amazing to watch.
And that scale that you're referring to, that you're talking about, it's what we reference as the intimate and the infinite of this project, right? Those scales of this larger epidemic, but also how do we celebrate and acknowledge the individuals and the lives and the 10 to 12 to 20 people that were impacted by this one person's life.
So I think a lot about when Pam and Annette and Michael and I were walking up the hill towards the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, in awe of what Brian Stevenson had called into to materiality, into through this conception and the manifestation of National Memorial of Peace and Justice. And I had this idea. I think Michael had been talking to Pam and Annette, and I had been already making these kind of memorials with the stars. And I thought about how many people who my cousin was killed in 2000. That's almost 25 years ago. And there have been at least probably 500,000 people have been shot and killed by someone else in this country since then. And at least 500,000 more people who shot and killed themselves in this country since then. And I only agree to be a part of it because Michael is very compelling. Because I was like, I don't want to have any part in something like this. Because of the, I haven't learned the grace and the fortitude and the power and the beauty, I have a lot of love in my heart. But this work makes me angry. And it's hard to be complicit in making something that makes you angry. And so I'm thankful to Maggie and to Sam and to Jadi, who have been kind of the stalwart, kind of continual voices of, I don't want to say reason, of vision. When either me or Mass Design or Michael weren't able to do our part, the fact that you all were able to continue to stay on track and honor the work is something that I really appreciate. And that's what I love about making art in a collaborative way, that we can be a small part of it, we can initiate it, we can put an idea out into the world, but we rely on the generosity and the care, the vision, and the effort of others to carry that out. And so what I see isn't this moment or a past moment, I see the moment where this project reaches its ultimate, I think, manifestation, which is in maybe every city, or at the same time, or in maybe in a different form. We deserve an AIDS quilt level of an idea and representation to honor all of the people who are victims of gun violence in our society. And not only the people who are killed, but the people who are living. Because the trauma that many of you carry also is something that is invisible to us. So I just wanted to say all of that.
You've touched on healing, you've touched on activism, and I think that healing and activism are not always brought into close dialogue with art, though we know that art has a very unique relationship to both of those processes. I think especially about your work, Hank, where if sort of propaganda and art and propaganda are often thought about as sort of opposing, where sort of art as activism is sort of conveying an idea, and that art is somehow outside of that space. But I think so much of your work really challenges that kind of binary. And I think similarly with the work, when you were talking here, you said, I feel like a fish out of water. I don't make art, I'm not an artist. And yet I think your interest in the healing arts, right, and your work with Ruth as a kind of working artist, really challenges that notion that art is somehow separate from healing. So I wonder if, just to sort of ask you to share your reflections on the ways that you think about the relationship between art and activism or art and healing a little bit more in your practices. Now, I know you've answered this question a million times, Hank.
I believe art is healing. I think there are synonyms, but I also don't think that art is something that has to be named. I think art can be the way we share a look, the way we touch, the way we dress, the beauty in which we consciously or unconsciously intend to present ourselves in the world with others is art, the way we speak, the way we move. I love places like this where magicians like Jill and so many others have created boxes for us to be able to be consciously engaged in art and art making and art in the celebration and the beauty and the healing experience of art. However, I think I'm most invested in challenging myself and others to recognize that we don't need to name it or to define it for it to participate in that healing process of art making. And I say that because I don't know if I'm sure you all have had those experiences where you there was just something moved inside you and you're like, I don't know what that was. Mm-hmm. But it didn't start, it was something out there did it. And oftentimes, like when art just gives, when there's a frame around it, makes it easier for us to see those things. And I love to do that, but when it's healing for me to get to sit next to you and to hear about how you get to dig back. You know, like I don't even want to come, but I was called to come. Yeah. And then I was able to participate and create art with others as the healing came over me. And so that antenna that's out there, that calling something art allows us to kind of tune into, is something that I always am drawn to. We had that experience in Sharjah last year too.
Whew. Thank you. Yeah, it's that anxiety that I was feeling is not there. It's really not there. It's you know, for me is, again, culturally, making something, doing something, don't know what it is yet. When it's complete, there's the sense of, okay, that brokenness is not there anymore. It's still there, but it's not consuming me. And I think that's when I started with making the buttons, you know, cutting the pictures out of the paper, you know, and then cutting the buttons and pressing the machine and just doing something physical. Or whether it's, you know, my mother, when I would sing, my mother, she would always say, honey, don't quit your day job. Just don't quit your day job. Because for me, just singing, and I swear I could sing, it's doing something. And you, as you were talking about something is happening, something was happening inside of me. That my anxiety was just, all right, just get out of here. You don't need to be here right now. And so thank you for that. Yes, art is healing. When we first started this work, started the peace curriculum, the young people would write stories on peace, their commitment to peace, their contribution to peace, and then they were published in Boston's Book of Peace. They were published authors. And there was a space where we gave them where they would talk about brother, cousin, father, uncle, nephew, somebody being murdered, somebody being killed, and somebody imprisoned for killing somebody else. Yet, for them to be able to write it and then to make that connection from the tragic to peace, that they were able to say, wow, something's happening inside of me, and here I am now as a published author, that someone is reading what I wrote. So thank you for that. Am I an artist, or am I in the artist world, or am I just contributing to healing through the work that and I'm going to say that I have been blessed, to just contribute something that for me is healing and peace are central to everything, because as painful as it is, the reason why this memorial is here, for me, it's calling out for peace. It's calling out for, we need peace for our sake, or for the sake of the generation that's coming. Not for them. They are at peace. They are resting in peace. We now want to make sure that we're calling for the generation to live in peace.
Well, with that, I want to open it up to a few questions before we can all join together on the stage for a reception. I know there are some microphones going around, and if you raise your hand, we've got one over here.
There's a mic coming your way.
Maybe just wait, it's coming right down right now. Thank you so much. Right down here at the five rows up.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you to all of you for sharing your experiences and time with us. I think something about memorials, there's a retrospective element to it, but it also seems to be forward-looking. And I'm wondering if you think about these memorials as a challenge to do something differently, or as an inspiration to take action.
Yes, we do, right? So I was talking earlier about how the thesis of the lab, the Public Memory and Memorials Lab, is to ask this question of how can spatializing memory, how can, creating physical spaces, these moments of healing, these cultural practices, these artistic practices, how can they be a call to action for generations to come? How can they inspire this notion of what can I do as an individual? What can I do as a member of a community? What can I do as a member of a broader society to ensure that this tragedy that we're memorializing, this wrought history that we're memorializing, this part of life that we're memorializing is something that will never happen again? How can I be compelled through this emotional journey, through this experience, to do something about this instance? And of course, here we're talking about gun violence. And so the idea is, how can we invite folks to come into the houses and to contemplate the lives of these individuals, to perhaps see themselves reflected in it, to have a certain sense of, be overcome, quite honestly, by a certain sense of empathy that then says, okay, how can I contribute to ending this epidemic? What is my proximity to this? And ultimately leave from the experience transformed and catalyzed to think about how gun violence is actually impacting us all. So I would say it's totally future forward and calling people to action, or should be, and all memorials should be, yeah.
Another question?
There was one right here.
Pass it along.
Ruth, take that sheet right here.
Perfect. I think your microphone's coming over.
Oh, there was one, there,
And then you can pass it right back. Yeah. Perfect.
Thank you so much for this very thoughtful conversation. I'm African American, and I've had the opportunity to go down south to plantations that, they're not functioning as plantations, but they are still there, physically there. And I remember on this one tour, we passed an area that was just an open area with trees on either side of it. And I wondered what was there. And then the tour guide told us, this is the cemetery for the slaves. And I'm thinking of like some of the other things that we have done to commemorate as African Americans, with the bottles. And I'm just wondering if you all had, have you ever had a chance to do any research on some of the things that we did, maybe things that, people remembered from Africa when they were brought here. I just wondered if you had any type of exposure to, any of the practices of African culture for, various memorials.
I saw you point at me, so I will start, and then...
well, because you have a studio in Rwanda, so.
We do, yes. And so I don't know that there's extensive research that we've been able to do to date to better understand some of these practices around burials and mass graves. But there certainly is an opportunity to think about how these practices and this work can be informative in some of the work that we're doing here as it relates to this idea of being able to intimately represent the individual, right? And not just reduce folks to these like larger numbers, the mass grave, but you were talking about the bottles, and part of the bottles is how do we create a multi-sensory experience that allows the soul of that person, the presence of that person, of those individuals, to still stay with us by way of the bottles, in their physicality, but also the sound that they make when they're clung against the wind and so forth. And so the other thing I wanted to say to that is that this question that you're asking, I don't know if you saw me smile as you were asking it, but it's something that we're also starting to research very heavily as it relates to another project that we're doing in Sugar Land, Texas, where the remains of 95 individuals were discovered in a mass grave site. And the question there is, how do we mark this site? How do we prevent this site from being kind of erased and forgotten in this same way? And so these practices of referencing other cultures and thinking about the ways in which other cultures have represented death and the celebration and the homegoing of death, but also how these other cultures have celebrated life in this way is something that we are starting to begin. So I appreciate the question, and I'm sorry that I don't have a wealth of information to offer to it, but the reminder is very much appreciated.
Do you want to ask the last question?
So I'm soft, but I'm a master's student right now in architecture, and my thesis topic is memorializing a site that's kind of really close to me. And there was one comment that you said that really resonated with me, being angry when you're doing the work. How do you kind of step back from that and really try to do the work without getting the anger, I guess, to speak for you, or do you lean into it?
Well, I think love is a powerful antidote for quelling or releasing or calming, relaxing anger. Anger also can be a manifestation for me of my ego. My ego's desire to be in control of things that I cannot control. And so when I think about something that you said, I agree with about them resting in peace, but I also believe that these people, their spirits are working. They're working through us because they're, and I think they always are. Are we listening? Are we collaborating? I don't know. And so for me, a lot of times I'm just like, okay, it's not about me. You just chill out and just allow what the spirits are doing to work. And there's a different timeline. There's an infinite timeline, frankly. And my markers of success, my markers of when and how it should look aren't the markers. The collective hours are. And so I kind of have gotten good at surrendering, gotten better at surrendering and appreciating the magic that can happen when I let go. So I encourage you to just allow them to work through you.
Thank you.
And if I can add to that also, as a mother whose child was murdered, thank you for that. It is anger. It is my anger that's fueling me. I'm a very angry Black Latina. I am angry, yet I've learned to control my anger. My anger no longer controls me. So it's a battle inside, good and evil. It's happening inside. And acknowledging the anger, because have you seen Inside Out? Mm-hmm. Watch Inside Out, yeah.
It will not be denied.
Acknowledging that anger is healthy because it's real. And what's the other side? So I have to choose. Is my anger going to control me, or am I going to control my anger? So please, please trust yourself and yes, the Spirit. Lewis believed he was going to be famous and he wasn't going to work hard for it. Well, it is the Spirit. It is the Spirit. What? 30 years later? We are celebrating 30 years of healing, teaching, and learning because it's the spirit that's driving me.
And call him his name.
You just don't understand how this connection, because when you're talking about spirit and when people say, how did you do it? I don't know, God just said do, and I said, okay. And that doesn't make sense in America, in this world that you have to have everything, and if you don't, you can't move forward. So yes, trust the spirit that's inside of you, that little voice that's saying, go ahead, go ahead. Even though someone is saying, girl, you can't do that. That is crazy. You didn't hear can't, you heard you can do that, and you move forward, so.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and I really hope that